Have you kept the key to why, my sweet honeysuckle bride, stays locked in chains to cry when I come humming? When I come humming, when I come humming, to drink from your nectar cup. Did you give me the test? Why?
Grace's peculiar presence in the seed picker's pocket could be put into perspective either by the poverty of the picker's public protestations, the purity of his very private prostrations, or simply by the price of his poultry preaching. But I will make it easier, and in doing so, you may just become able to fill your own pockets until they overflow. When I first met the seed picker, the weather was much like it is today, and I believe the day of the week was the same. And come to think of it, even the time of day was the same as it is now. The only difference is the place. It was a place far away from here. Let me try and describe what it looked like.
When I come humming, when I come humming.
The inner beds were full of persuasion, rained on with falling debris, whilst being sheltered and paved with radiating repetitive patterns. The ground was arranged in spokes that sucked and spat visitors out in equal proportion, while stolid spiraling chirigaresque columns tied their million-toed roots continually stretching and leaping into the sky, to open up giant umbrella fans and hang down plume after plume of proffering handshakes. In the dancing shadows squatted and scurried a plethora of hawkers, hustlers, entertainers and opportunists that tugged on the sweet, sticky web. At the same time, pigs and bullies, tortoises and beggars, tigers and thieves curled the air, making it fester in the unwashed corners. Thorny musicians prickled and prompted the lounging lizards to untangle their legs and dance around the perimeter, from one corrugated lamp to the next. The complete plaza was ordained to the south and banked to the north, sinks of gold in equal measure. In the morning, the sun shone on the flags of the Junta, and in the evening, it set against the shutters of the daily Diarios, avidly printing the next day's news. These encastled whitewashed walls served to reflect the sky and swirl the echoes of hairless dogs and the pronunciamento alike, whilst on these eddies hummingbirds swept from bloom to bloom. The previous night had its play, both shaking the columns and banging at the doors of gods and rulers alike. So much so, amongst everything, there was littered a carpet of offerings from the canopy. Amid this is where I first spied the seed picker, but he wasn't sifting through the blossom ball for buttonholes. The seed picker wasn't pruning, pollarding or poaching. Neither was he sat idly absorbing the fruit of his labour. He was, instead, half in this world and half in another, whilst doing a good impression of being in neither. For a petrified moment, it was difficult to discern whether he was a sinner or a saint, falling from grace or levitating in mid-ascension. Then, as if in a desperate act of attrition, my gaze could suspend him no longer, and he hailed his immediate surroundings in a showering curtain of ripe papaya kernels, spitting out a potential orchard in between spluttering coughs. Any chance of progression in his flamboyant procession was abruptly halted by the snagging clamping of chains ceasing any blood in returning to his heart through his dragging veins. The iron knuckle links interned him to a verdant mortal coil, and this papaya-palmed island rode above a brook of outstretched hands, which snaked around the plaza towards the gaping confessional door of the cathedral, La Mama del Sur. Defying the current and the claws of the flagging tuba and trumpet bearers, the celestial raft climbed the virginal cascade, and before being swallowed whole, the accused refused his arrest in yet more seed-filled breaths.
It was by chance that I got the answer, a fluke in the lucky dip. Trial and error has poisoned my elders, so I could think of doing nothing else.
But still, his imprisoned shore rose to the vaulted jaws. In a last desperate bidding, he sowed the truth.
I drank from the font, and I ate from the manger. I pocketed the tithings, and I got the light to see in the dark from the altar.
But the key that would free him remained lost in the waves, and I watched as our mother drank him in. As the passionate tide receded, in the gutters between sleeping dogs and cracks in the market, the devotional attested to witnessing the spontaneous sprouting of ruder everywhere the procession had been. Between these miraculous bouquets is where I clocked the seed picker for the second time. But he wasn't reaping his votive harvest. The seed picker wasn't counting, collecting, or comparing, nor was he climbing towards the canopy to mimic swinging from the vines. He was instead prone to protestation, tasting and smelling the riches of the earth. He'd errantly not been to taste of our mama from the south, as he was now professing allegiance to El Bella Banco del Norte. The seed picker's outline was barely determinable underneath a writhing mass of multitudinal segmented cases, all vying for superiority in their diligent work ethic. Scissors clipping, mandibles ripping, they appeared to be tearing at his fragile coil. A million minuscule insect bodies prospecting peripheries and demarcating their claims. The seed picker remained motionless, cruciform, paralysed by the terrifying invasion across his private territory. He was being disrobed, leaf by leaf. The ordeal endured beneath the watch of his shadowed sombrero wearing accusers. The bandits reaped their plunder and hauled the harvest off to their vaults. Whose arms are these? Defrocked for buying a usurer, or these acts of usury? Thieves along avenues of syncopated marching. In this place, the high sun radiates a relentless, penetrating stare. It tears at the brittle claws of cats and puts hounds to sleep, dreaming inside mountains of salted pescados. In the Plaza fountain pond, tortugas stretched their collars and splayed their toes, whilst those with forked tongues wound their bellies round the wrists of the fanning palms. Those in shells roasted, whilst others sent to torture in hell sought sanctuary in fire alarm campanellas. The cashiers toasted to their newly won riches with salt and thyme, the bankers winding the keys and locking the cages. At 2 minutes past noon, even the shadows retreated behind the shutters, and a shimmering mirage rippled the colours, washing thoughts of the beggars and rambling mad with gifts of gold and glittering jewels. The leaf cutters, having shorn every last growth on the seed picker's frame face, were now replaced by the only ones that worked in the middle of the day, the poor and displaced. As these creatures pecked and peeled at the leftovers, the seed picker could take no more. He cracked open his bare lips and rasped into the dust that he thought his crime woefully unjust.
I've taken what was only mine. I've made no profit from burying the plunders or unruly crime.
But the desperate and the needy paid no heed and only tugged at the remaining blunt stalks.
I only sought to grasp at the flowers, which blooming hung from the outstretched arms that grew in the gutters at your feet, from when I was hauled past here against my will.
But the hungry and weedy were deaf and blind to his pleading, and proceeded to uproot any last remnants.
How was I to know that when I spat out the poison, that it was to land in fertile ditches in your garden of riches?
But the sour and the tight-fisted had left the picketing fence to gaze on their solitary interest, leaving the seed picker's charred remains to charity.
Passed us by and by. Now I see why. I know that it hasn't weighed me down. I know that it hasn't.
The last time I saw the seed picker, he was free from debt and shackles. He was posted with 4 corners, his head held high above all others, fluttering in the breeze. This must have been one of the many portraits, all of them framed by acclaim, numbered in the thousands. I imagined how his expression must be exhibiting in numerous plazas across the land. In one place, vying for precedence over virgins and crosses. In the other, laced to the gates as a band races into the notches of the marital siesta. And finally, way out west, suffering the torment of being grinded into pulp by a barren, solitary goat, forgotten after a menial market. The Colonel had gone to the Daily Darius printing block with a 2-pronged attack. The first was titled
Wanted.
And the other,
I'm sorry. Take me back.
He'd clearly not been paying full attention, because happen chance had intervened and resulted in a desperate begging love letter to his enemy, being repeated and falling like so many unbound leaves in a summer storm. This once fierce and proud leader now cowered in his fortress, humiliated and full of remorse, his trigger finger trembling with mortality, his ring finger hooked around a braided spray of myrtle fronds. The likeness of the seed picker on the poster was undeniable, though his red-handed rooster-pecking appearance lay awkwardly cradled in a flower bed of tepti blossoms and slung with an eye-popping price tag for love. The bouquet was garlanded with an engraved horseshoe, a sonnet, both requiem and mercantile.
Wanted for preaching your love to me. Found guilty of the miracles of hope and faith. Condemned to spread forgiveness, whether dead or alive.
In the centre of the plaza, there is an angel. Her wings are unfurled, reaching into the first moment of flight. She perpetually bathes the community as cascades wash away the honeysuckle pollen dragging at her wings. She had begun her mission, and the palms were in their youth and needed supporting, when the congregation preferred christenings instead of funerals, and before the trustees' acts of usury. Her purpose and commitment set her apart from other fledglings. She received numerous acts of caressing by those bold enough to wade through the depth of wishes. Yet no matter how desperate her desires to rise towards the stars, it was the brugmansia that serenaded with the highest horns. And it was these sacrificial pale blooms that broke into the colonel's cell, sailing one by one past the window's armed bars and releasing his fingers from their deathly clutch. The colonel, freed from his paralysed attention, now between the barricades, peered around the twisting date trunks and trailed the damp footprints that poured over the paving, until his searching was rewarded in the perpetual reflective eyes of the plaza's guardian angel. The colonel cried. The colonel lay down his totems of pain and expired to a tidal sigh, and reached into his waistcoat pocket for his embroidered necktie. Unfurling the flag, his pet eagle released the fruits of military labour, and one mystery after another fell in a chain to the floor, his memories rudely awoken. The stained heels and toes which fanned around the fountain's hem were indisputable to the colonel, and their purpose and commitment all too familiar. What tormented him so was their interlacing with another pair, and from the lookout post, where the dance ended, was laid bare. The paces became fainter, one after another, until they vanished at the shady kissing seat, a place famous for indiscretion. The beginning of the tango was less clear, but one partner's entering was dyed with the same juice from the mystery fruits that coloured the barrack floorboards.
Are you missing me? I'm losing you. Are you missing me? I'm losing you. I'm losing and confusing the dirty floozy.
The colonel cursed his misfortunes and curled his mustachio into an entangled contortion. He reached out and grasped the bars, hailing his remorse for not resisting, and how he purchased the fruits of their histories. The colonel stamped on the fruits, splitting their skins and puncturing what was inside. He lifted the cell keys from their chain and threw them at the barred skyline. They twirled momentarily before they fell out of sight and into the plaza.
At my feet. And here are those keys. And I have a question for you. Which prisoner from the plaza did I set free with these keys? Was it the protester held high against his will, his unforgiven sins that made him ill? Was it the debtor, pegged down in trial by ordeal, his apparent acts of quackery that made him steal? Or did I release the man at arms from a haunted dungeon cell and his fleeting chance of fatherhood spent? It was in fact none of these. It was, perhaps surprisingly, the person here and plain to see. You understand, it was me that first went to the door of the believers in resurrection, carrying my own story of an unwanted creation, only to rue the day my eyes were opened, having confessed to sinning. I told you of the procession at the beginning and my emetic seed sowing provision. So, Yes, you've correctly seen the future, because it was also me that touched the angel's trumpet and became robbed blind, buried beside the divine, having to be physically tied down for the crime of diagnosing, prognosing and prescribing. You recall how I told you of the ordeal and how it made me feel, whilst the lenders plundered my pockets until they were empty. Don't worry, you're in luck. You already know what I did next, though it left me with a price on my head. You remember the wet footprints when I danced with the Plaza's Angel? Well, of course, it was me that fulfilled her wish and set her free from the entangled anchor in the Plaza's yearning sea. And the wanted poster mystery, its provider and a misguided missionary? If you lean a little closer and look between the intoxicating sprays of God's gifts, you'll see that I was tasked in the middle of the night to protect her purity. I can see her here, innocently beside you now, wearing a bridal garland and discharged from battle, guilt-free. But remember the Colonel and how he threw away this key? I've kept you on your toes, wondering long enough, how can that prisoner also be me? Well, if you're a sinner too, then you'll understand that behind every smoke curtain there's a phoenix roosting in the palm of your hand, at once both a golden egg and a hot spur in flame. Like that celestial gallus, I'm seldom seen and rarely heard, a cracked shell and a flightless bird. I've been touched, and I've been cursed. I've been poisoned, and I'm guilty of worse. It's better that my date with each new solar ray is locked away, safe from this stabbing beak and from dragging at her ascension. So, now you see how I'm able to be free, to pick up seeds from the shaded ground beneath the plaza's twisted trees. Before I button up, I have a final repose, and it's what I was told sat in those kissing seats.
There was a time before pockets. It was a time before people picked things up. It was a time when we lived only to swim in the sea or fly in the sky. After this came a time when we learned how to walk on the ground. Some stayed local, and some walked away, far away. One of the people walked so far that they went into a new country, where there were different plants and different animals. That person went so far away they did not recognise what was safe or what was dangerous anymore. Eventually, they walked so far they came to a place with no plants or no animals. They could not walk in the day because it was too hot, or at night because it was too cold. They became very thin and very thirsty because there was no food or water. So they lay down to die. But this country, seeing such a rare thing as life, picked them up and put them somewhere safe. Here, the person fell asleep and into a dream. In the dream, the person flew from tree to tree and swam in the rivers in the shade. However, even though this place looked like a slice of paradise, it held a dark secret. The more the person ate the fruits from the tree, the more hungry they became, and the more they drank from the river, the more parched their lips were. Finally, in despair, they knelt on the ground and prayed. The prayer was heard by a bear that was on their daily round, and the bear came down to the ground to discover what all the noise was about. On finding the person and learning about their despair, the bear opened its coat and put them inside. Inside the coat were pockets, many, many pockets, and in each pocket there was what the person needed. The person ate good food and drank good water from the pockets as the bear continued its rounds. When the person felt better, they began to look in the other pockets. Each pocket held a plant, some of the seeds, some of the roots, or flowers, or leaves. The person asked the bear, as it did its rounds, what the plants were in the pockets, and the bear explained that they were medicines. And so for many days, between good food and good water, the person looked in the pockets and asked what each medicine did, as the bear continued its rounds, until eventually the bear returned back to where they had first met. Here the bear took the person out of its coat and put them on the ground, turning to leave and go back to its rounds. The person complained, saying,
How would they be safe outside and all alone?
So the bear opened its coat again, but this time it took out an empty pocket and gave it to the person, saying that it was for them to keep their own medicines in, as they had been taught. The person looked inside the pocket. The person felt inside the pocket. The person smelt it, shook it, and chewed at its corners. But it was as the bear had given them, empty. The person asked the bear what to put in it, but the bear had left on its rounds only paw prints showing where it had been. The person awoke from their dream in a cave. To remember the dream, they took charcoal from the cave floor and drew pictures on the cave walls. It came to pass once in a while that the person would return to the cave on their rounds if they needed to ask the bear more questions, and at other times, between eating good food and drinking good water, the person would collect medicine and keep it in the pocket for when it was needed.
And this is what I was told in that plaza, far away from here, on a day much the same, at much the same time of year. I was told this story by the angel. She emptied my pockets and I surrendered myself to the guard. And here we are now, doing our rounds. And if you need to look in our pockets, please come back before the sun goes down. And if you go on a walk far away, remember to look out for signs of bears in large coats with empty pockets.
This is a gift, it's all that I have. I can't keep it anymore. I can't keep it anymore. Dreams I fulfill.